anymore, I feel kind of free.
I swear to God, if I catch you looking at my trash can, you will be blocked and reported. I live in a studio apartment. The only way I can get my bookshelves in the frame is if I stand between my kitchen and my unmade bed. And that's just how it's going to be. We'll see how this setup goes. If it's not good, I'll move. I'll do it, I swear.
But anyways,
welcome back to my channel, everyone. Today I have another video, just a monthly video reviewing the books that I read this month. This month was a really good reading month. This month being March, of course, March of 2021. I don't know why I'm saying that. Like, people are gonna watch this in the future and need to know what year it was.
anyways.
This month was a really good reading month for me. I feel like every book I read I really liked. I don't really have that much to complain about, and I read quite a few 5-star reads that I already want to reread and know that I'm going to be talking about in the future. So I have my Kindle with me and all of my hardcover books, and that's all the intro I have for you. Let's get into the books that I read this month. So the first book I read this month that was on my Kindle was Wicked Fox by Kat Cho, and this came highly recommended. I think I'd seen a couple TikToks about it, a couple booktubers that I follow were recommending it, so I decided to give it a read, and I really liked this book. I already forgot. Could I tell you anything about this book? Could I tell you the name of the main character?
Probably not.
While I don't think any of the characters were super exceptional, I wasn't attached to either of the two main characters. What I did love about this book is that the entire magic system and fantasy system was based on folklore surrounding they're in the city of Seoul, so it's kind of surrounding one of the stories that get passed down through generations and figuring out that some of them are true and magical and existing in the world today. And I really liked it for that reason. It made it interesting. So I really liked reading it just because it was kind of a different story. It was one that I hadn't really heard before, and it follows the story of a guy who meets a girl who is a creature that he's heard about in fairy tales but didn't realize existed, and they're kind of trying to keep each other's secret while also unpacking the years and years of both familial drama and the history of this creature in Seoul, and I thought it was a really good read and I would recommend. Shifting next, the next book that I read was The Bromance Book Club by Lyssa K. Adams, and I love romance books, that's no secret, but I feel like I rate them all just like a middle ground because it's like I like the characters, I kept reading, it was spicy, it was fun, but I really liked this one because it was different, because it was from the perspective of a male protagonist instead of a female protagonist, and even though it was still written by a woman, I really liked that the way the story was told. It follows the story of this guy. He's a very successful baseball player, but he is about to enter into divorce proceedings with his wife because he was never really a good communicator. He found out that he had never pleasured her pretty far into their marriage, and so he starts reading romance novels to try and educate himself on how to treat women and how to be better in the bedroom. And I like it because it was a totally different premise. It's not a girl that meets a guy and it's enemies to lovers or friends to lovers. It was kind of different, and that made it really fun for me. I've already recommended it to a couple of my friends, and I would absolutely recommend it to anybody looking for a quick, fun romance read. That's kind of different from the cookie cutter plot lines that a lot of romance stories tend to fall into. The next thing that I read on my Kindle, the third, fourth, and fifth book that I read this month, I kind of just clump all together because I read the entire Shadow and Bone trilogy. I have actually never read the trilogy before. I read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom before I read Shadow and Bone, I think just because I didn't even know that they were related. I'd heard a lot of recommendations to read Six of Crows and I was excited to read it and didn't do much more research than that. And
obviously,
with the show coming out at the end of April, I had to make sure that I read Shadow and Bone because that's what I think the first season is mostly going to be focusing on. And I'm really glad that I read it. I didn't like it as much as Six of Crows. I think just the characters in Six of Crows are so much more developed and so much more likable, and I was so much more invested in the storyline. But I still love Shadow and Bone, and I'm super excited to see it turned into a TV show. And before anyone else asks, I would date the Darkling. I'll leave it at that. Alright, we finally have a physical book. I had to get my hands on the physical copy. It is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. I was so excited for this book to come out. I was actually waiting to read it because I was really worried that I was going to be disappointed in the story, and then one of my friends started reading it and I knew that she was going to spoil me if she read it faster than me, so I picked it up and started reading it and finished it all in one weekend. This obviously follows the story of Nesta and Cassie, and it shifts perspectives from the first 3 to 4 books. And I'll say it, this is my favorite in the series. I absolutely loved this book so much. I love Nesta. I know that is an unpopular or controversial opinion. And for the record, I loved her before I started reading this book. So this book didn't have to change my mind. I went in knowing that I liked Nesta a lot. And I think the main reason I like this book is that it was told from a different perspective than a lot of fantasy books. A lot of fantasy books kind of fall into a predictable main character where there's a girl and, you know, she's been training, she's always good at with a bow and arrow, and she can protect herself, and then she gets thrown into this fantasy world where it's kind of cutthroat and she has to fight for herself. That's the plot of all of ACOTAR, it's the plot of From Blood and Ash, it's the plot of, I feel like, a lot of fantasy books. And what I like about this is it's a completely different main character. It's a main character that does not want to be in this world at all. She is completely hopeless at most things, and she has like a lot of regrets. She didn't help out her family when she needed to. She's dealing with a lot of like major mental health issues throughout the book, and I thought it was just so well written. I know that in the afterwards, Sarah J. Maas talked about how she was kind of dealing with a lot of mental health issues, and I think that definitely comes through in the book because it makes Nesta so much more of a well-crafted character as opposed to Feyre. I found Feyre kind of shallow at times, and with Nesta, I thought she had so much depth. I would have kept reading her inner monologue for chapters and chapters and wouldn't have questioned it at all, and I absolutely loved this book, so do with that what you will.
I'm sorry, Faison shippers, but I was sick of y'all, and I'm ready for
Nessian? That's that. On that. Alright, the next book that I read in the month of March was actually for my book club. I'm in a book club with 2 of my friends. We try and read a book a month. And the book that we read this month was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is the first book I've read by this author, although I have started listening to the audiobook of her other novel, Gods of Jade and Shadow, which is more of a fantasy read. This is like a gothic horror story, which I knew going into it, but I had never really read, I guess, horror before. I never read Stephen King because I'm kind of
a baby.
And that's okay, but this was the book club read, and that's what we're going to read this month. And I ended up really liking it. The beginning was kind of slow, but once you get to the second half where it really picks up, I was kind of glad that the beginning was slow because it kind of just had those like creepy scenes where you know that something's wrong but you can't quite put a finger on it. So once you get to the second half of the book, when you're like, oh no, this place is horrifying, all of those scenes kind of create the mood a lot better and can help you visualize what's going on. Either way, it follows the main character who travels to this super small town where her cousin is living and sending these really strange cryptic notes that makes it sound like she's in danger. So she shows up to this family's old manor to try and figure out what's going on with her cousin, and the entire family just gives off the heebie-jeebies, and you're trying to figure out what's happening both in this town and in the manor. And I liked the story a lot. Like I said, it was slow in the beginning, but once it picked up, I breezed through it no problem at all. And I am really excited to read other books by this author. She does a really good job of kind of tying in Mexican culture. This book is set in Mexico. Gods of Jade and Shadow also is, in kind of Mexican lore. And yeah, I'd recommend it. Even if you're like me and a big scaredy cat, this isn't super scary for a horror story. The only like kind of trigger warning that I might have is there are some like gory scenes, like scenes where I'm glad I didn't have a full stomach because it might have made me a little uneasy, and that's to be expected, but those scenes were pretty quick. So after the 2 kind of heavy books of A Court of Silver Flames and Mexican Gothic, I went onto my Kindle, went onto my Libby app. I said, I need a YA romance.
And I needed stats.
So I read You Have a Match by Emma Lord, which is a young adult romance book. It follows, although it's more complex than just a romance, it follows a young girl who does a DNA test and finds out that she has a full-blooded sister she knows nothing about. So her and her sister make this plan to both go to the same summer camp so they can learn about each other and try and figure out why their parents separated them. And then she also finds out this boy that she has a crush on is a counselor at the camp, so she's kind of juggling these 2 things that she's trying to work through. And I really liked it. It was kind of like a spin on Parent Trap, which was really fun because I love Parent Trap like every person should. This is also the second video in a row I've talked about the Parent Trap, so maybe I should just rewatch it tonight and get that out of my system. But either way, it was a fun kind of spin on a Parent Trap-like story where it's like you have these two sisters that are trying to figure out if they even like each other or hate each other, if they have anything in common. And then underneath it all, you have a little young adult romance, some like little flirty moments between childhood friends, seeing if they're going to make it work together. And I really liked it. It was a very good palate cleanser after a couple serious books. And sometimes I find YA romances a little, not cringy, but just immature, and that's fine. That's because they're meant to be for young adults, and I'm 27 years old. It's not meant for me. But I really like this one because I didn't find it super like cringy or childlike at all. So it was really refreshing to read, and I'm glad that I read it. So at the end of March, because it was my birthday, my boyfriend and I actually drove up to Tahoe because I hadn't seen snow all year. This is my first year that I've spent the entire year in California, and I really wanted to see snow. So obviously when we went to Tahoe, I had to pick some fun wintry books to read because I had a second chance to read winter books that I'd missed out on. So I had to bring The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. This has been so highly recommended, and it's been sitting on my shelves for the longest time because I'm like, I need a cozy reading setting to read it. It's set in Russia in the winter. This girl that's born into tragic circumstances, her mother died in childbirth, and there are all these rumors throughout her town and throughout Russia that she's magical, and she doesn't know why. She's kind of just trying to figure it out. And you flash between her and some of her siblings who have curious encounters trying to figure out, you know, what the daughter is capable of. And it also kind of ties in some Russian lore through her grandmother, her nanny, figuring out that she's kind of promised, I guess, to this winter god. That's like the most vague description I can give without giving spoilers and without reading the second and third book in this novel yet. This book was a little slow, but I've been told it is meant to be slow because it is just an incredibly slow burn throughout the trilogy. So I'm excited to dive into the second and third books in this trilogy. And then because I had a second chance to read kind of like wintry spooky books, I brought along The Coldest Girl in Coldtown by Holly Black. This is the first Holly Black book I've read. I know.
Oh my god, she hasn't read The Cruel Prince?
I haven't. I may never. But I did read The Coldest Girl in Coldtown, and I really liked it. It brought me back to my like Twilight days in middle school where like vampires were just the coolest, sexiest thing that you could ever imagine being around. But it was kind of a twist on that, which was nice. It wasn't your typical vampire story. So The Coldest Girl in Coldtown follows kind of a dystopian future where vampires are just well known in society and they can infect others. So a lot of vampires are sent away to what is called cold towns, these places where only vampires live, and they're kind of trapped inside so that they are prevented from infecting the public. And this girl, the main character, Tana, wakes up at a party that she was drunk the night before and finds out that while she had locked herself in the bathroom, the entire party was murdered by vampires. And so it kind of follows her journey trying to drive to a cold town because she doesn't know whether she's been infected, and she finds a vampire inside the house that she takes to the cold town with her, and you're trying to figure out his backstory. And then once she gets into the cold town, that entire just system and government of the cold town is so interesting. And that's why I really liked it. I picked up a vampire book thinking it would just be a stupid vampire book, like girl falls in love with a vampire.
Not saying it isn't that.
But it was just like more complicated than that, which I really appreciated when being a 27-year-old reading young adult books. I appreciate when something is a bit more nuanced or complicated. And yeah, I was a big fan. And then I really couldn't decide what to read next. I asked my friends for recommendations, and one of my friends said, you read a vampire book, let's just commit to vampire books, and next you should read The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix, which is another like horror-like book, but also has having to do with vampires. And it follows, I guess they're all, the age isn't clear, but they're all moms, so 30s, 40s, in a small southern town, and they create a book club where they just read true crime novels. But then people in this town start mysteriously dying, and one of the moms becomes convinced that there is a vampire in the town, so this book club kind of starts investigating and trying to figure out if it's true. I guess this is the one book that I have a complaint about this month, and I hate to do it because I know a lot of people like it and love the author, but the thing that annoys me most about books is if I'm reading a book and instead of being invested in the plot, the only thing I'm thinking about is the type of author that would write this book. And so I was reading it, and the entire time in the back of my mind, I'm just annoyed that a male wrote it, because it did just rely on a lot of like misogynist tropes, unfortunately. And I get that it was supposed to be set like back in the 90s when, you know, things were different. A lot of women made the choice to stay at home either because they felt obligated to do it or otherwise. But it's still, at the end, it was supposed to be this inspirational story, like, wow, women are capable of anything. And it wasn't. It said women are capable of, you know, paying attention to their neighbors and cleaning up. So I didn't really like it for that reason, and I found it kind of annoying at the end. That's still, like, spoiler alert, ah! They kill the vampire. Even at the end, they took down this entire vampire, and it was
It's like, wow, women can really clean up after themselves so nobody will know that they killed him, and they know where everyone in the town is so they won't get caught.
and it just relies on these tropes that, like, the only thing women care about is cleaning and what other people around them are.
My camera died during this and I thought it got the whole review, but I guess not. I was just saying it still relied on tropes, even if it was trying to do this whole woman is powerful thing, and I feel like it could have been done better. I'll probably try and read other books by Grady Hendrix. Maybe I was just in a bad mood while reading this, but that's my review. It is what it is.
The next book that I picked up was on my Kindle, and it is In 5 Years by Rebecca Serle, and it is nothing that I thought it would be, but also like so much better than I thought it would be. I picked it up thinking it was a romance, and while it does have some themes of romance, at the end of the day it's just a book about friendship and like the power of friendship, which I genuinely love. I just love books that follow how resilient friendships can be, especially between women, and also friendship breakups, something I think that isn't talked about enough. So I really liked this book. It follows the story of a main character who, on the night of her engagement to her longtime boyfriend, wakes up in a dream to her life 5 years in the future, and there's this mysterious man with her. She's in an apartment she doesn't recognize, and she obviously has the daunting realization that she's not going to stay with the man that she got engaged to. And so you're going through this story, she's kind of working through those 5 years, and you're kind of trying to figure out what changes. You know, when does she break up with this guy, and how does she get together with this new guy and move to a new apartment that we never thought she would be in. And I don't want to spoil anything at all, but the thing that I loved the most about this book was just the friendship between the woman who had had the dream and her best friend. And like, that's all I'm going to say because I don't want to spoil anything at all. But I think it was just a really nice story about female friendships, and very much appreciated at a time in coronavirus where I don't get to see my girlfriends, and just knowing like how powerful female friendships can be. I loved it. I loved it, and it was a good palate cleanser after the Southern Vampire Book Club.
Sorry, I had to do it to him.
And then,
Oh my god, Abby, I can't believe you haven't read this yet. How would you call yourself a booktuber if you haven't read it yet?
I was scared. I was legitimately scared to read this book because it had gotten so many good reviews, and it was just so daunting. I love enemies to lovers books. I love fantasy books. There is no reason as to why I hadn't read this, but I read it. I read it in like 48 hours, and I love it so much. It is an
S tier
enemies to lovers book, and when you hit that last 50 pages, you will absolutely know why. It follows the story of Poppy, who's in this kingdom where she's called the Maiden. She's basically meant to be a virgin. Nobody's supposed to see her, touch her, interact with her, and on her 19th birthday, she is going to ascend and be given up to the gods in order to, it's unclear, but in order to guarantee the safety of her kingdom for decades to come. And she obviously is not super happy with the fact that she's not allowed to have any friends, any interactions with males, and nobody's allowed to even see her face. So it begins with her sneaking out of the castle where she meets this mysterious guard man, and just the story going from there. I don't really know I'm giving a synopsis because I think I am literally the last person to have read this book in the entire universe, but there it is if you want it, and I cannot wait to read the second book. I told my friends to read it, so they read it, and now we're going to do the second book together, and I believe the third book comes out at the end of April, so that's just timed perfectly, and I love it.
I love it.
I'm sorry I waited so long, but there it is. So that is it for my March reads. Like I said, I had a really good reading month. I did have one DNF, which I forgot to talk about. I started reading The Maze Runner. I've never read it before. I thought I would read it because I wanted to watch the movie, and then I read the first 10 pages and I was like, I have so many books I need and want to read. I'm just gonna watch the Maze Runner movie, and that's my DNF. But like I said, I had a really good reading month. I would recommend literally every single book that I read this month, which is shocking and appalling and almost rarely happens. If you want to see any other videos from me, please let me know. I'm happy to make a video about my TBR list. I'm happy to talk through my favorite series ever. I do have a giant book outlet order coming later this month, so I'll do a haul video probably. And other than that, just like and subscribe, and
And
happy April.
nothing hurts anymore. I feel kind of
Bye!
We're still the kids we used to be.